across all regions and affecting all kids. New test scores show dramatic learning loss.
Scores now at their lowest level since 1992. So the drop in reading just wiped out 3 decades of academic gains.
You look at since 2014, right? This percentage has been dropping pretty steadily, where students are performing below quote-unquote basic on history.
This is a crisis that America cannot ignore. The long-term educational crisis facing our students has by far outpaced the physical threat that COVID ever presented them.
Hello, my name is Rebecca. I'm an education advocate with a bachelor's degree in professional writing and a master's degree in secondary education. I have made it my goal to expose the true terrors taking place in your son or daughter's public education system and provide alternatives. If that sounds interesting to you, please like and subscribe, and of course, keep watching. In the early 1600s, American education happened at home. Then, in 1647, Massachusetts became the first colony to pass an education law. This Old Deluder Satan Act called for every town with 50 or more families to hire a teacher of reading and writing. The most popular book of instruction at the time was the New England Primer, which contained readings from the King James Bible. The book represented the Puritan worldview and discussed such topics as God, sin, salvation, and obeying parents. Since the southern colonies were more spread out than the small towns in New England, they were more challenged in adapting an education system. Wealthy Southerners sent their children to private tutors, but the poor still lacked opportunities to learn reading and writing. Another figure of early education was Horace Mann. He pushed to unify school systems to create common schools, ones that would be available to everyone regardless of wealth or status. His pursuit placed him on a panel of the newly created Board of Education in Massachusetts in 1837. Looking for the best way to implement a form of public school, he studied the education models of several countries, eventually stumbling upon a Prussian model in what is now modern-day Germany. After a trip to Germany, he returned heavily influenced by their education model. During the next 30 years, American dignitaries poured into German schools, where they earned degrees and later returned as staff in all the major universities in America. By the 1900s, all the PhDs in the United States were trained in Prussia. Horace Mann's new concept was beginning to bloom, that concept being the state is the father of children. To him, the state was responsible for the education of the student. This belief led to the first law of education in 1847 that made it mandatory for children to go to school. That year, Mann, with the help of Massachusetts Governor Edward Everett, who had been the first American to receive a PhD in Germany, adopted the Prussian model of education for the entire state. The rest of the country quickly followed, and by the 1900s, most schools had implemented the new system. Social obedience through indoctrination. That was the goal of the system. In fact, the system was created after the Prussians were defeated by Napoleon in 1806, a defeat that Prussian government blamed on their soldiers thinking for themselves instead of following orders. To ensure this free thinking never again plagued the king's success, a new 8-year system of schooling was created to teach students that the king is always right and that his orders should be obeyed without question. That was the goal of the system, complete surrender of will and preparation for military success. This system was scientific, according to the philosophers of the time. It would create a controlled environment where children would learn what to think about and how to think about it. Critical thinking, as a contender to controlled thinking, was discouraged and done away with. Education should aim at destroying free will so that after pupils are thus schooled, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than their schoolmasters would have wished, said Johann, a founding figure of education whose philosophy greatly influenced the creation of the Prussian model. He is also known as the spiritual father of neo-Nazism. In few words, the model of education used in America today was created in Prussia and influenced by neo-Nazism. It has the goal of promoting the good of not the individual, but the government. In 1983, a report was released by the United States National Commission on Excellence in Education. That's a mouthful. This landmark report, titled "A Nation at Risk, the Imperative for Educational Reform," touched on the denigration of the public school system's ability to provide quality teaching and learning. The report was written in the majority by James J. Harvey, in synergy with perspectives of other commission members. Harvey wrote, "The educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and a people. If unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war." In other words, the state of the system was so bad, it looked like someone with negative intentions had wreaked havoc on it. I highly recommend that you read through the report in full yourself, but I will touch on a few key details. Among many other indicators of America's risk mentioned in the report are the following. Illiteracy. He wrote, "Some 23 million American adults are functionally illiterate by the simplest tests of everyday reading, writing, and comprehension. About 13% of all 17-year-olds in the United States can be considered functionally illiterate. Functional literacy among minority youth may run as high as 40%. False achievements. He stated average achievement of high school students on most standardized tests is now lower than 26 years ago when Sputnik was launched. Over half the population of gifted students do not match their tested ability with comparable achievement in school. Declining test averages. The College Board's Scholastic Aptitude Tests, SAT, demonstrate a virtually unbroken decline from 1963 to 1980. Average verbal scores fell over 50 points and average mathematics scores dropped nearly 40 points. College Board achievement tests also reveal consistent declines in recent years in such subjects as physics and English. And he goes on and on and on. One line that shook me to the core was this one. Each generation of Americans has outstripped its parents in education, in literacy, and in economic attainment. For the first time in the history of our country, the educational skills of one generation will not surpass, will not equal, will not even approach those of their parents. Surely the nation was at risk, and as we'll soon see, that risk has not diminished. In response to A Nation at Risk and the No Child Left Behind Act of 2002, a new initiative for education was proposed, Common Core. I will be making a longer, more in-depth video detailing Common Core and its pitfalls, but for now we're just going to cover a few details. The thought process for Common Core began as early as the 1990s, but it wasn't introduced into schools until 2010. Common Core is supposed to create national education standards to ensure that students finishing high school are prepared for college. The goal sounds great, since all districts would then have a set of standards for grading students, putting them on a level playing field when applying for colleges. However, this new type of education, or dare I say experimentation, led to overcomplicated mathematics and literature that didn't fit the grade and confused students, parents, and teachers.
Want us to do it
I don't know that way. Why would they change math? Math is math.
Okay,
Math
Dad.
is math.
One of the biggest issues was that Common Core did not allow for teachers to tailor instruction to student and community needs. It also introduced complicated material that students weren't ready for, and teachers weren't prepared to teach. Also, the system became more financially incentivized by President Obama's promise of $4 billion in federal grants under Race to the Top, a school improvement program. Ultimately, Common Core failed. A decade after it was implemented, student performance had not improved. A report by the federally funded Center for Standards, Alignment, Instruction, and Learning found that test scores have been declining steadily since its adoption. They reported, contrary to our expectation, the data revealed that Common Core standards produced significant negative effects on fourth graders' reading achievement during the 7 years after the adoption of the new standards. The Boston-based Pioneer Institute said this about Common Core after studying it intensively. Instead of accelerating the curriculum to more advanced topics and following the practices of leading international competitors, Common Core's politically driven process resulted in the adoption of the mediocre curriculum sequences used in a number of mid-performing states and promoted progressive instructional dogmas shared by its developers. Common Core curricula is still used in some places in the United States, in some schools, but a lot of other schools have completely eradicated it and rejected it, and they're researching other methods of education. Students are passing, but are they really learning anything? Statistics as recent as 2020 aren't looking positive. According to the nation's report card, mathematics and reading scores have dropped across the board. A news article by PBS NewsHour simplified the results, stating, "The new nation's report card is out and the results are grim. Test scores are at their lowest level in decades, with steep declines in both reading and math proficiency in nearly every state. Nearly 450,000 4th and 8th graders and some 10,000 different schools around the country were tested, and the results are alarming." Here are a few things that the report noted. Only 36% of 4th graders and 26% of 8th graders were proficient in math, meaning they could demonstrate solid academic performance on challenging subject matter. In reading, it wasn't much better. Just 33% of 4th graders and 31% of 8th graders were deemed proficient and above. From 2019, the average math score for 4th graders fell 5 points, with 8th graders dropping by 8. In reading, average scores for 4th and 8th graders fell by 3 points. Not one state in the country saw significant improvements in these average test scores. The article blames the majority of the poor results on the pandemic, but since academics were already declining before COVID, I think it's safe to assume that although the pandemic did disrupt education, it is not completely responsible for the damage that we're seeing. And how are students who don't know the material passing? Good question. I believe the mindset for many teachers is just push them through. Whether this agenda is coming from the school district or from teachers who are overwhelmed by a lack of time and resources, I'm not sure. I'll be taking a deeper look at teacher struggles in an upcoming video, but it's safe to say that based upon all this evidence and with other factors at play, the American education system is still failing. Not only was its original intent to brainwash students into closed-minded obedience, but also its application has resulted in academic debilitation. Although students may learn some things, they are learning at a level far beneath what their parents learned, always on a descending stairwell. A fitting question to ask is, what does this mean for my children? Your children within the public school are not thriving. Even honor roll students can't trust that the education they are receiving is on par with what one would expect from their age group. Many factors play a role in the destruction of American education. Here are a few that I've listed. A damaged system that focuses on social advocacy above reading, writing, and arithmetic, funding incentivized standards that schools must meet regardless of whether they meet them honestly or deceptively, overworked dual income parents who don't have the time to properly train students to sit still and listen, overwhelmed, underpaid, and unsupported teachers who are met by rebellious, even aggressive students who are unwilling to learn, a broken mindset that the state is responsible for the education of students morally, physically, and academically, and many more. In future videos, I intend to further break down and expose other classroom issues and provide parents with tools to use in combating a broken system and ensuring your children get the education they deserve. If you are interested, please like and subscribe, and please comment down below what issues you're concerned about in your school system. I realize that there is no perfect one solution for every family. Some people don't have the funds to send their children to private schools, and some people don't have the time to school at home. But what I believe is so important is educating yourself about what is happening in the school system so that you can make informed decisions and even enact changes in your own districts. I hope my videos spread awareness, provide options, and encourage changes. Again, thank you for listening.